to our late evening session. We're going to pick up on page 59. So what we're going to do, coming back from our dinner break, is practice everything that we've just talked about. So page 59 takes you into your first independent case study. And you've got Hawkins Office Park on page 59. You are going to be adding a new property entirely from scratch to your portfolio. So right now, I still have Humperdinck Plaza open. I need to open my navigator. You guys can see my screen? Yep. I'm going to open the navigator up. And I think that I've saved the property lately, but just in case I haven't, I'm going into the Home Viewing tab to save the property. And once that save completes, I'm going to close the Names tab for Humperdinck from the navigator. And I get back out to my open portfolio view. So you're going to be adding a property from scratch to your existing portfolio. Do not make a new portfolio. Adding a new property here, it tells you what property type to use, what your analysis begin date is, the length of the analysis, takes you through property details, including the area measure, inflation rates. You've got 1 miscellaneous revenue and 5 operating expenses. We're then going to turn over to page 60, where you have a capital expense to enter. And you'll start by with just 1 tenant in the rent roll. Then you'll have a market leasing profile to create. You'll enter purchase price, debt note, continuing on to page 61. You'll update the resale calculation and the present value discount rate. Once you get all of that into your system, you have reports starting on pages 62, going through page 64. And your goal is to tie out or match with the reports in your book. So we're going to take about 20 minutes to work on this, and I know that's not a lot of time, and you may not get all the way done. That's okay. This is just practice, guys, so I am not collecting these at the end of, I'm not spending like 10 to midnight grading these or anything like that. This is practice for you. But it is really good practice as you are preparing for the exam or for the university challenge, woo-woo.
Or for assignments in your class.
There you go, or for assignments. So, you know, this is really good practice, guys. So feel free, if you are, you know, nervous about any of these inputs or questioning anything, feel free to work together. This is not, you know, mandatory silence time. My name is Jess. If you have a question, I'm happy to come take a look. I'm going to be working at the same time as you. So if I have my head down, you can either bring your computer up to me or wave your hand and I'll come see you once I get my case study completed, okay? So let's go ahead and start working on that. Like I said, I will check in with you in about 20 minutes and see how you're doing, okay? All right. Saved the property, go ahead and hit save. Now we are going to be coming back to this case study, so we're going to keep working on Hawkins when we get to the almost to the end of class today. This will be one of the last things we do today, wrapping up with Hawkins. So a couple of you have asked about the certification exam, and I always wait until we get one case study under our belts to start talking about it. Your certification exam is a 2.5-hour timed test that you can take from any computer that you have both internet access and Argus Enterprise installed. The exam itself has to be taken using the web browser Internet Explorer, which, like, blech, I know, but we've had issues with every other web browser crashing during the exam. So if your exam crashes while you're taking it, you can't get that back, right? So you've just wasted a piece of your life. So go ahead and use Internet Explorer for that. As I mentioned, it is a 2.5-hour timed test, so you can take that from any location. The exam is broken down into two parts. The first section is 75 multiple choice questions. I pointed out the chapter reviews a little bit earlier. In fact, when we very first began, I pointed out your first chapter 1 review. So that is a good example of the types of questions that are asked on that first part of the exam. So you've got chapter reviews at the end of every chapter. You also have 50 review questions along with their answers at the back of the book. So that is a good, your review questions are on page 265 and the answers follow. So those are also good practice. So in general, for the first part of the exam, it is asking you for program navigation. It is asking you to identify formulas. And then in some cases, it will give you parameters and say, find out what the value would be using the appropriate formula and these parameters. So that's the first part of the exam. The second part of the exam is a case study. So very similar to like what we just did for Hawkins, a little bit more complete, of course, with some more detail. But you have to, which is, the reason why you have to have the Argus Enterprise program, because you have to be able to model within the program. So you have 15 multiple choice questions to answer based on what you model within the program. And those questions will be asked about the reports that you run. So, just like you've gone through and modeled everything and then you check your reports to see if you tie, unfortunately with the exam you don't have anything to check to make sure you tie, it's just the questions. So it will say, what is your NOI in year 2? Or what is your cash flow available for distribution in year 6? Or whatever it is, just different questions about your reports. For the most part, those questions focus on the cash flow, but they do occasionally, throw in another report. We will cover the reports that might come up on the exam, so you'll be able to find those. Hopefully you can remember that from class. So you have to pass both sections of the exam together. You cannot pass one portion and let that carry you through the entire exam. You have to pass both the multiple choice section 1 and the case study in section 2. Does anyone have any questions about the exam?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So, part 1 is 75 questions, multiple choice. Part 2, the case study, is 15 questions, also multiple choice.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened, and how many times do you take the exam? Because, let's say what happened, your computer crashes or whatever.
Sure. So if your computer crashes, you'll reach out to Carrie Mayfield, who is the person that sent everybody your license.
Yeah.
You'll reach out to her and let her know that the exam crashed while you were taking it. She can go in and reset the exam. Now we can actually see if the exam crashed on our end or if you submitted it and got a failing grade, right? And you're like, it crashed. Totally, it crashed.
Yeah.
So she can go in and reset it if we can see that on our end. And then if you do not pass on the first try, I think you get, I don't want to say, I'll follow up with you guys on that, but you do get a retake exam. I want to say it's at least, I think it's 2. I think it's 2 retakes at a highly discounted cost. So you don't have to repurchase the whole shebang.
We paid for them, at least for the one exam. I don't know if we paid.
So I don't know how their retakes would.
Know until when they can take it with whatever we.
So they can take it as long as their license is available. So if your license expires, that means you can't use the program anymore. We encourage you not to wait until the day that your license expires because we don't know what time that expires. So we don't want you to be in the exam and your license expires.
And that's in the help section that will tell you,
Right. So again, if I go back to the file viewing tab, on the help tab, your license will have a subscription ends date.
When's the soonest we can take it? And then if we want to take it whatever date, how do we
So now I don't know, is Carrie working with you on getting credentials to everybody? Or she might be getting credentials after the class takes place, but they'll come from her. So the person who sent you your license is the person who will get your credentials to you. And I would imagine, what I've seen in the past, if she hasn't talked to you about it directly, has she?
Credentials meaning
To log in and take the test?
okay, basically ability to do this.
Yeah, she hasn't talked to you about that, has she? Usually what happens is after the training class, it comes out, like, within the week, so.
And there is advantage of not waiting that long because,
Yeah,
you know, you
exactly.
just use 14 hours if you study some.
Yeah, I would take it once a year right away.
Yeah, waiting 3 months probably not gonna help.
Passing score that you need to get?
70% for both sections. Yeah.
So do you think as soon as we finish the course with you tomorrow, we'll be ready to take the test, or?
That's entirely up to you. So it's how comfortable you feel, how ready you are, yeah. I'll say for me personally, I can memorize formulas all day long, right, and regurgitate that. So for me, the section 1 was no big deal. And I, did the 50 review questions. I actually took the prep test as well. We have a prep exam, so I did that as well and knocked that out. What worked for me was the case study. So just knowing where everything is, being able to enter everything in a very timely manner, so that I had time to troubleshoot if I saw my number wasn't on the exam. I'll give you guys a hint. Every now and then you will see on that section 2, you'll see none of the above. It is never none of the above. If you do not see your number, something has gone awry. So for me, allowing enough time to model my file and do any troubleshooting, that was key for me. So it would be entirely up to how well prepared you feel.
Where's the prep test located?
The prep exam is available for purchase through our website.
Okay. And then your slide deck with those calculations, when do we, huh?
The email
Send
will
them. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And you guys will get an email from me by the end of the week. Yeah.
If we are able to get through the entire manual, that pretty much should.
Yeah. We will get through the entire manual in this training class. So everything that's in there, everything that we bring up and talk about is fair game. So like I said, those key boxes, we pull exam questions from those key boxes on the on many pages. They're all over the place. So those are good places to pay attention. Any other questions? All right. Okay, so now you kind of have a better idea of what the exam is like. What I'm going to do is, like I said, I saved Hawkins, so now I'll go ahead and close it from the Navigator, get back to my open portfolio view, and we are going to continue working in Humperdinck. So I need to double-click on Humperdinck Plaza to open it back up. And when my file opens, it opens into the input screen, which is actually where we want to be. So make sure you've either got the split screen view with the inputs in view, or if you need to get there, remember you can go to the home viewing tab. We need to have inputs in view. And we're going to turn over to page 66. And on page 66, we are going, question.
You mind saying one more time how to get this? You want the Humperdinck one?
Yes, that's correct. So you can get back to your Navigator, select the tab for the portfolio, the training portfolio, and double-click to open the file. Good? All right. And I'll hide the Navigator for now. We do want to be focused on the inputs. This evening we're going to start talking about increasing the rents you are receiving from your tenants. So we talked, a little bit earlier about how once you enter that value for your rental revenue, that remains flat unless you apply increases. So here we are. Now we're going to apply increases. So we want to start growing what we are receiving from the tenants. We're getting back into the rent roll. Can anyone remember where the rent roll is? What's my parent tab?
Tenant.
There we go. Tenant's parent tab. drops us right into the rent roll sub-tab. Now, the first thing we're going to do is decrease the area measure for Inigo. Right now, they're taking up our entire building. So I'm looking for that area measure field for our existing tenant, and I'm going to drop that down to 30,000 square feet. And in this first example, we're going to increase the base rent we're receiving from Inigo by $1 per square foot every year. Now, there are lots of ways that you can apply increases, and we're going to look at all of them this evening. I keep wanting to say this evening. And we'll start with changing the base rent itself. So I'm scrolling over to the rental income band, and I can see that base rent I previously had in place, $22. If I want to change the base rent itself, I'm going into my base rent column ellipses. This opens a window. On the top half of the screen, I have a line item with what I've already set up in rental revenue, and the bottom half of the screen is giving me a graphic that represents my annualized rental revenue. So I can actually hover over this graphic at any point and see what that annual total is. Well, it's still $22 per square foot, but now I've dropped the area measure down to 30,000, so I can see every year I'm getting that $660. It even shows me when the original lease ends, and I can see the downtime occurring before I pick up the market rental rate for this tenant area. So we are increasing by $1 every year of this tenant's 3-year lease term. The first way that I can start using this screen is going over to the right-hand side of the screen. I have an add button, and I'm going to add 2 lines here. So I leave line 1 alone, but I'll say in 2019, my second line, for 1 year, updating that year column, the base rent, tabbing all the way over to the amount column, will be $23 per square foot per year. And then in 2020, going all the way out to the amount column, that is $24 per square foot per year. And as I tab over and update these amounts, you'll notice the graphic on the bottom half of the screen is showing me that rent growing over the course of the tenant's lease. Now, there are lots of things that you can do with this screen. You can change the base rent, which we've just done, change the actual value we're receiving. You can apply steps on top of the rent received from this screen, and you can also perform rent reviews from this window. We've done all that we're going to at this point, so we want to click OK at the bottom of the window, and our base rent now varies. We're going to look at a new report we haven't looked at yet, and that is on page 68. This is our individual tenant cash flow report. So far, we've been looking at a property level cash flow for everything. Now we want to start breaking down our information on a tenant by tenant basis. So I'm hitting F3 to move into the reporting screen. And to find this individual tenant cash flow, I'm navigating to the tenant reports parent tab. And I'm looking for the tenant cash flow /LPV subtab. This report defaults to report on all tenants. And I can see that report on all tenants is actually a drop-down menu. So I can report on tenant groups if I have set them up. I haven't at this point. So what I actually want to do is report on individual tenant. Now you can see that's not changed our report at this point, and that's because we only have one tenant right now. But as we add tenants to the rent roll, the include drop-down menu will get populated automatically, so we can simply toggle to our next tenant to view their details. So here's what I see, $22 times 30,000 square feet, and then we have a $1 per square foot increase into year 2, so we get up to $690. Then another $30,000 increase into year 3 before the end of the lease at the end of year 3, and we pick up the market terms in year 4. Now there's a difference between this individual cash flow and the property level cash flow that I want to point out to you. Notice in year 4, we are at 581. Well, if I take this over to the cash flow, for the whole property, go into my Property Reports Parent tab and Cash Flow sub-tab, notice that in year 4, we are not at 581, we're at 698. So there is a difference between these reports and what information they're giving you. The property level cash flow is showing you potential base rent. What is everything you could be getting? And then we see absorption and turnover vacancy. Any downtime is deducted. Whereas if we go back to that individual tenant cash flow, Tenant Reports Parent tab and Tenant Cash Flow sub tab, notice that that first line is not potential base rent, it is base rent received. So this is only showing you what you are actually getting from the tenant. And that's a difference between the two reports that we'll see come up a couple of times. So any questions about this first increase that we applied?
How do I go back to it for the increase?
So you'll go back into your inputs by hitting F4. Any other questions? All right, let's all go back into our input screen. I am hitting F4. And on page 69, we are adding a tenant to the rent roll. And this tenant will have a fixed step that is an annual percentage increase. So I am going to add a record to my window. And my second tenant is Westley Law Firm. And Westley is in Suite 200 of our building. They've signed a contract with us for an office lease type. And their area measure is 4,500 square feet. This tenant moves in before our analysis begins. So the space is available on the specified date of May 15th, 2016. And I'm just going to type that in here. And the lease will start on that available date. When you see the start date update to the same available date, you'll then check that you are using the default lease term of 5 years. And we'll move right into the rental income. So I'll keep scrolling across. This tenant will pay us $16 per square foot per year with a 3% increase every year on the lease anniversary. So I'll start by entering their base rent, $16 per square foot per year. Now in this case, instead of going into the base rent ellipses and changing the base rent itself, I see you, just one second, I'm going to be using the fixed step unit column. And when I use the fixed step unit, that allows me to apply an increase on top of the base rent. What's your question?
I thought we purchased the asset in January of 2018, but the lease starts on May 2016.
You bought it with the tenant.
Oh, okay.
So in this case, our unit of measure is percent increase. And this is an annual increase every year on the lease anniversary. And then I can enter my step amount, 3%.
Wait, where are we going?
We're working with the fixed step unit column now. Good?
Put 3%.
I'm turning over to page 70, and on page 70 we see that Westley Law Firm is paying their net share of all expenses over a 2016 stop amount of $5.50 per area. So we need to move out to the recoveries. This is what they're reimbursing us for expenses. I am going to use my quick click grid to get there. I'm hitting recoveries. And this again is a stop amount. So we, the landlord, pay the $5.50 per square foot. The tenant pays their pro rata share of anything over that amount. Last time we used base year stop, and that let the program calculate what the expense amount was. But in this case, the tenant's stop amount has been established. It was established before our analysis began. So if your stop amount is calculated or configured before the analysis, your program cannot go back to 2016 and calculate that 2 years before we said the calculations begin, right? All of our calculations start in 2018. So when you have that case, the program can't calculate it for you. You have to know that number in order to hard code it into the program. So in this case, we have a stop amount per area. That's the unit of measure I'm looking for. That's the structure, stop amount per area. And that activates the amount column, where I can enter 550. We have no tenant improvements or leasing commissions to enter for this tenant area. So I'm scrolling out to the market leasing section, and we are going to use the office profile assumptions. But we're going to say in this case that instead of rolling to market, we know the tenant is moving out. So upon expiration, they are vacating the space. Which means we look to the office profile and we use new market assumptions only. But I have another piece of information. I also know that I'll only have 5 months downtime between when this tenant's lease ends and when a new lease begins. Well, if I use the new market assumptions from the office profile, we said before we broke that there were 6 months downtime between leases. So I want 5 months instead. The good news is you don't have to create a whole new market leasing profile to adjust just the one item. Right past the upon expiration column within the rent roll, you have 3 override columns that follow, where you can override an element of the assigned market leasing profile. So it will take all of the other elements and interpret it just like you would think and use the override instead of the value that's within the profile. So in this case, if instead of 6 months, I want 5 months downtime between leases, I can go to the months vacant override. This is another one of those areas where you see the text, there's a drop-down menu, you can enter your number here anyway. So right here I can type in 5 months.
Good word.
And once you get that information into your program, we can go look at that on a report.
Wait, sorry. I didn't even see.
What's the question?
No, I'm trying to find that.
So we're scrolled all the way out almost to the right-hand side.
Yeah, I'm having an issue. Going back to page 69.
Yeah,
Fixed step percentage. Yeah, the fixed step percentage increase. The end date of my lease says 12/31/2022. Wants to be 5/14/2021, and it's not letting me change.
So you started May 15th of 2016 with a 5-year term?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm having the same issue.
Yeah.
I'm going to come take a quick look and see if it's something we can easily resolve since... You can turn your computer?
Okay.
Your start date should be the same as the available date.
Got it. Start date, same date.
So notice in this start column, I toggled to available date. All right, so any other questions about our inputs here before we go look at what we've got on a report? All right, I'll hit F3 to look at my reporting screen, and we are still looking at an individual tenant cash flow. This is at the bottom of page 70. Now, instead of looking at Inigo, from the Include drop-down menu, we're selecting Westley Law Firm. Now, keep in mind that we cannot see 2016 or 2017 numbers. That's prior to our analysis begin date. But we can see, starting in 2018, a 3% increase from year 1 into year 2, and a 3% increase into year 3 before the lease expires in year 4 and we pick up the market values. Yeah.
I don't know what we can do, but is there any way to like make the screen clearer? Like I can't really see it.
Right,
Like, from here, I can't really see
the light
it.
shining on it.
Yeah, I mean, is there, do these lights control? Oh, for the screen?
We can turn off the lights, but that would make everybody fall asleep, so.
No, we won't go to sleep.
No.
Can you, is there a way to increase the
It's like,
the size of the phone?
maybe the size will
The size of the phone? Know what I mean?
Well, it's, I mean, my font is already
Screen size crash.
adjust,
It's down to the right.
You have the screen crash?
it's already,
Okay.
No, you guys, I think it's these lights, the way that they reflect onto the screen.
I
Because
think it
when I
is.
sit
I mean, there's no way to dim just this row.
I don't know.
I will be there.
I don't know, never explained, and I don't really think
I mean, it's in the book, right?
we won't, we already bought our laptop. It's a little bit late.
Yeah, it's in the book.
Maddie, you may wanna come just closer.
Sorry?
Maybe you wanna come closer. But I don't know how to do that.
And it's in the book.
Yeah.
All right, so let's keep talking about this report. In year 4, as I was mentioning, we have downtime occurring. The original lease ends May 14th, 2021, because it started May 15th, 2016, and was a 5-year term. And then the market lease begins. We said there was a 5-month vacancy override, so we know there's downtime occurring here. But on this report, we don't see absorption and turnover. We only see rent received. So I want to look at this report and make sure that that downtime is occurring exactly as we entered it. So continuing on to page 71, we are going to change our reporting options. And within Argus Enterprise, now in 11.5, I'll stress that, in version 11.5, you have a long cut and a shortcut to changing your print settings or changing the way the reports are showing up. So we're going to do the long way first, and then we'll go back and do the shortcut. I'll go into the report options, top left-hand corner of my screen. And I'm looking for the setting called print interval. Instead of my global setting, I'm going to choose monthly here. And hit OK. So once the report updates, I can see my monthly report on page 72. And I'm really not focused on that monthly value here. I want to go all the way out to when the lease expires. So May 2021, I'm looking for month 41 on this report. So I'm scrolling across all the way to month 41. I see 2 weeks accounted for in month 41. It's ending May 14th, 2021. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4.5 months downtime before my market lease begins in October. So why are we seeing 4.5 months downtime when we said 5? There is a reason for that within Argus Enterprise, and it is a file setting that's automatically in place for you. So we're going to keep this report in view and just go back to our home viewing tab. And we're going to visit those modeling policies. I very briefly mentioned the modeling policies a little bit earlier this evening. Your modeling policies, if I click on them now, are your file settings. So the modeling policies allow you to change calculation frequencies. They allow you to activate and deactivate certain features within the program. And here on the General tab, there's a setting already in place for us underneath Market Leasing to round all market leases to start on the 1st of the month, which is why we see 4.5 months downtime instead of the full 5. If I uncheck this box and hit OK to go back to my report, my calculations are in progress, and now, look there, I can see that full 5-month vacancy override. I've got 2 weeks in May, 2 weeks in October to make that full month, and then 4 in between. So the market lease is starting on October 15th now.
So can you repeat where you find these spring?
Absolutely, because I'm going to go back and put that setting back in place. So through the home viewing tab, within the modeling policies, that's where this setting lives. So top of your screen, modeling policies. And it's underneath on the general tab, underneath the market leasing settings. So I am going to leave that box checked so that all of my market leases start on the 1st of the month. When I hit OK, my report updates again, and I'm back to seeing that 4.5 months downtime. So any questions about that? All right. Our third tenant is on page 73, and this is a tenant who will have a mid-lease percentage increase. So last time we did an increase every single year on the lease anniversary. Now we're going to say they have a one-time increase halfway through their lease term. They also have a speculative lease start. So I need to get back into the inputs, F4, and I'm going to add a record to my screen. In my third line, I have Miracle Max Auto Group. And Miracle Max is in suite 300. Now this time, instead of having a contract lease status, they have a speculative lease status, which is my only other option here. But the good news about contract and speculative is that this is a cosmetic change. So choosing contract or choosing speculative is not affecting the way your rents received are calculated. This setting really just allows you to filter some of your reports based on an assured versus speculative income basis. We'll leave their lease type set to office and enter an area measure of 6,250 square feet. And at the bottom of page 73, I can see that this space is available at the beginning of our analysis. So I am toggling the available column to analysis begin. However, the lease is not going to start until the specified date of March 1st, 2018. So I'm moving over to the start date column to enter that date, March 1st, 2018. Now I have a discrepancy between when the space is available and when the lease begins. So when you have a discrepancy like this, it will cause absorption and turnover to report on your cash flow. You are saying the space is available but sitting vacant. So there's potential rent you could be receiving but are not because a lease has not commenced here. Okay? So that's just something to keep in mind. If the dates match, you don't have any downtime being reported on your cash flow. If there's a discrepancy between the dates, then you will have absorption and turnover reported.
So in a real life scenario, you would update the Argus on when there's a new tenant, right? Okay.
Yeah. And in a real life scenario, I actually do see those discrepancies used because we're going to talk about this more a little bit later, but absorption and turnover is a part of your general vacancy calculation. And so this if you're running a general vacancy calculation on the file, then this having the available and start allows you to sort of make that a more accurate figure.
Okay.
But we'll get into that calculation in a little bit.
You say absorption and what?
Turnover vacancy. That's the second line of your property level cash flow. All right, so we've got their start date entered. We need to update their lease term. They will have a lease term of 10 years. And I'll turn over to page 74. We're going to detail their base rent before we enter anything at all. So I'm going immediately into the base rent ellipses for this tenant. Now I'm just going to work with the lines provided. So March 1st, 2018, I'm going to update the years column. For 5 years, this tenant will pay 100% of market. So I'm moving over to the units column and selecting percent of market and entering the amount 100%. And that pulls from the assigned market leasing profile. Halfway through their lease, in March of 2023, they're going to have a one-time 5% bump to their rent. So I'm leaving this type set to base, but my unit of measure is percent increase, and my amount is 5%. Now, instead of seeing that increase over and over like we did with a fixed step, we're seeing that happen one time. And after the bump, it remains flat at that increased value. Okay? Once you have these increases applied, you can hit OK at the bottom of the window. We get back to the rent roll itself, and we'll continue on to page 75. We need to give this tenant 3 months of free rent. And the next thing I see is that the tenant has negotiated to reimburse us for expenses in the fixed amount of $10,000 every year. So now we're headed out to the recoveries. You can scroll or use your quick click to get there. We are looking for the structure, fixed amount. And then in the amount column, we can enter our $10,000. This is a flat $10,000. So I need to control for inflation on this $10,000. To do that, I can go into the amount column ellipses. And how would I control for inflation on this window?
Bottom left.
Bingo, you guys got it. So I'll select from that drop-down menu, no inflation. And when I see my inflated annual total at 10 all the way across, I can hit OK on this table. My tenant improvements and leasing commissions for this tenant area are going to be the same as what we paid out for Inigo Montoya. So we're moving into leasing costs. And of course, you can go through and type all of this out again, but to save a little bit of time, you can copy and paste multiple cells between lines on your program. So I'm going to select all 6 cells for my leasing costs from Inigo and paste that into Miracle Max. I'll start by selecting the improvements unit for line 1, and I'm going to hold down my shift key and highlight all the way out to commissions timing. So you can see now it's a little bit darker blue. You can either right click to copy or Control C. And once you've copied the information, you can move down selecting the improvements unit only for Miracle Max and Control V or right click to paste. So that's a little bit of a time saver. We'll let the office profile assumptions apply. Upon expiration, we'll roll to market, and we're going to keep all the defaults here, no overrides. So we want to now look at an individual tenant cash flow for Miracle Max. I haven't saved in a while, so I'll go ahead and save the property. And then I'll move into my reporting screen. I'll hit F3. I want to update this report. I'm going to include Miracle Max Auto Group from that drop-down menu and scroll all the way back to the left-hand side of the screen. So again, this report only showing us rent received. We did say the space was available in January, but we do not see any income in January or February. The lease does not commence until March. We give 3 months of free rent, so we see that right below the base rent. We start receiving revenue in month 6 of our analysis. We remain flat at $11,458 for 5 years. It's not until March of 2023, let me get all the way out there, that we see that 5% increase And that's just one time, so we see that bump and then we remain flat at that increased value through the end of our analysis.
Do you want to like maybe right click on one of these? Well, I don't know if you can actually.
Yeah. Does it tell you like that it increased, or you know what I'm saying? Like, I know that we entered all those inputs,
Mm-hmm.
but like, let's say you forgot or whatever.
Mhm.
Where can you see it quickly?
Probably the rent roll is back to your inputs.
Right.
You've got, within the tenant reports, you have a lease summary report, so that's going to show you what their base rent is along with any increases.
Gotcha.
If you're just looking for like a visual snapshot of that information,
Yeah.
probably the lease summary would be a good place to check.
Thank you.
Sure. And speaking of other reports, I actually do want to take a look at an additional report that I think you guys will find really helpful. I find really helpful. Before we go look at it, I want to take us back to the property level cash flow. So property reports parent tab, cash flow sub tab. And I now have absorption and turnover occurring in both years 1 and 4. So this report that I want to take you to next is called the Lease Audit Report. And the Lease Audit Report will break down your tenant-driven items on a tenant-by-tenant basis. It is really, really helpful as you are learning the program and working on case studies, especially within your manual. The Lease Audit Report allows you to target where your figures are coming from down to specific tenants. So you can be a little bit more pointed when you start troubleshooting. Instead of just, I don't know where the problem is, I'm just going to start checking every line, everything I entered. Well, that is a waste of energy. The Lease Audit Report allows you to zero in. Okay, specifically, the numbers are off for this tenant, so I can focus on that line item. And the nice thing is, of course you can get there. The way to navigate there within your program is Audit Reports Parent tab and Lease Audit Sub tab. But I wanted to point out here that your cash flow is actually hyperlinked to it. So you may have noticed that you have several hyperlinks within the cash flow, all of these sort of line item titles here. They will either hyperlink you back to your input screen, and your tooltip will appear and tell you, or they will hyperlink you to another report within the system. So I'm going to click on the link for absorption and turnover, and that will redirect me to the Lease Audit Report. As I mentioned, it's Audit Reports Parent tab, Lease Audit Sub tab, and now I'm getting an update of everything I have entered for every single tenant. I'm getting a breakdown now on a tenant-by-tenant basis. So if I'm focused on lost absorption and turnover, I can see in year 1 that is only coming from Miracle Max. And that's the 2 months that we said the space was available but sitting vacant. Then in year 4, it's coming from both Inigo and Wesley. Now we know this because we just set it up, but for Inigo, that's the 2 months downtime between leases, picking up the blended average. And for Wesley, that's the 5-month vacancy override we entered that then got shortened to 4.5. Okay? So I encourage you, we're looking at the lease audit now. I encourage you to use this report, especially when we get to the end today. You'll be working on another case study. This lease audit report, sorry guys, that's to take my laryngitis medicine. I'll remember to do that. 10 minutes, we'll take a break. I'll take my medicine. So that lease audit report, as I was saying, can be very helpful. We are going to revisit it because you can even customize the report. So maybe you don't need to see all of this information or information for all of the tenants. You can break this down so you see it for only specified tenants or only specific pieces of information. And, real world experience, this gets used a lot to back up your reports. So we're going to enter our very last tenant on page 78, and then we'll take a break. On page 78, we've got a retail tenant who is going to pay us percentage rent. So we need to get back into our input screen. How can I do that?
Or
Yeah, you got it, F4. So I'm going to add a record to this screen, and our last tenant is Buttercup Bakery. What's my theme?
what?
Case study, what's the theme?
I know Inigo Montoya is from The Princess Bride.
There you go, it's Princess Bride case study. Princess Buttercup, come on you guys.
Right.
All right, Suite 400. Everybody's having like a light bulb moment. We will leave their lease sets
We used to have those, like, the names of all the people that work for Argus, right?
sometimes. Yeah,
Yeah, like, when I was running, it was all the people that worked there, like Carrie and,
not anymore. We had to move on.
all right.
Now it's Princess Bride. Anybody guess the other one? Hawkins?
No, I didn't see it. What are the
Oh, yeah, that movie.
Stranger Things?
Stranger Things? Yeah.
All right, so we're going to leave our lease status set to contract here, but the lease type will be retail. So you can either hit the drop down and find that, or start typing, and it will automatically populate from the list. And Buttercup's area measure is going to be 1,250 square feet. This is another tenant who moves in before our our analysis begins. They move in before our analysis begins. So the space is available on the specified date of June 1st, 2014. I'll type that in. And the lease is starting on the available date. We're toggling to available date there. Question?
I'm just curious, whenever you type in something in the area, like a separate, tab opens up in the bottom.
Yeah, the bottom half of our screen opens up.
What's that for?
So this allows you to enter if your area measure for the tenant is changing over time or taking anything else into account.
Oh.
Okay. We've got this space available, June 1st, 2014. Lease starts on the available date. We're going to use the default lease term of 5 years. And then we need to enter the tenant's base rent. So we're scrolling across into rental income. This tenant will pay us $14 per square foot per year. So I'm just typing that in. And in this case, we're not going to include any other increases because the tenant will pay us percentage rent on top of their rent, their base rent. So at the bottom of page 78, I see that I am going to take 3% of the tenant's projected sales volume, $750,000 a year, over a natural break point. So we can get all of that into the system, and we can talk about the calculation that we're doing to calculate their retail sales revenue. I need to scroll past CPI before I see percentage rent. And the sales percent basis that we are using is percent. That then allows us to enter our takeout, 3%. The sales volume is an annual dollar amount of $750,000 over a natural break point. And you have lots of different drop-down options here. Now, page 79 is a reference page for you on percentage rent, but we're going to talk about it. So how do I know what I'm receiving in retail sales revenue? So I'll say right off the bat, I have a call-out box at the bottom of this screen. By default, your general inflation rate is applying to the projected sales volume. Because the projected sales volume is increasing, so too then is the retail sales revenue that you receive, okay? So that's just something to keep in mind. So they've reported to us $750,000 in sales volume. To find the natural break point, or the point at which we will start taking 3%, we have to divide their base rent by our takeout. So your natural break point is the base rent divided by your cut. In this case, it's $1,250 times $14 divided by 3%. And that gets us to $583,000. So we're going to take anything over that amount. This is our chargeable sales, the volume minus the break point. In our example, 750 minus 583 gets us to 166. So that's what we're taking the 3% of. To find our retail sales revenue, we multiply the chargeable sales times our takeout of 3% and get $5,000 in year one. Any questions about retail sales revenue?
Is there a reason I wouldn't have percentage rent in my column?
There is. If you go back to your property asset type, so property parent tab and description sub tab, make sure that the property type is mixed use with office and retail. If you don't have retail, you can't enter percentage rent.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
What if you want to use, if it's mixed use and you want to add more components than just office and retail?
That's where you start getting into the use of a portfolio.
Yeah, okay.
So if you've got office retail and then an industrial piece or a hotel or whatever it is, tomorrow, late evening, we'll talk about your consolidated reporting options. So you can take, 3 different properties that maybe are all ultimately part of the same property area, but your reporting then would be performed on the portfolio level. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's get back into AE. We've got all of our information entered here. We're going to leave the recovery structure set to net. And I'm scrolling all the way out to the market leasing profile. I see right now that we have the office profile applying, but this is a retail area. So we need some retail specific assumptions to apply to our retail tenant area. On page 80, we're going to create that retail profile. So I need to move into the Market Parent tab and Market Leasing sub-tab. But instead of creating these retail assumptions entirely from scratch, I'm going to use the office profile assumptions as a base set of assumptions and just change a few items for a retail area. So I'll select the office profile, and I'm going to up to my home ribbon, and I'm using the duplicate record button. I get an immediate copy and paste, and the first thing I do is rename. These are now my retail profile assumptions. Page 80 shows me that along with changing the name, I'm also changing my new and renewing base rent. It will be lower for a retail area. So my new base rent is $16 per square foot per year, and the renewing value will be the same. So you can either type that in or hit the drop down and select same as new. Moving on to page 81, I need to make sure that I'm updating the recovery structures. So I'm looking for recoveries. I used my quick click to scroll there. We would not use base year stop for a retail area, so I need to update this and apply net. My tenant improvements will be lower for a retail area. So new TIs, moving into those leasing costs and improvements, new TIs will be $8 per square foot. Renewing TIs, 0. And the last thing I'm going to do to this retail profile is ensure that all of the retail sales that I set up in the original lease term continues into the market term. So we're moving out, scroll, 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 out to, all the way to the right-hand side, percentage rent. This time, instead of using percent, I want to use all the same values from the original lease. So I am going to continue prior. My sales percent basis is continue prior. And I want that projected sales volume to continue inflating. So my sales amount unit is continue prior. And the last thing I'll update is the breakpoint, and I'll have that continue prior as well. So everything just continues exactly as I originally set it up. Now we need to make sure that this retail profile is applying to our retail tenant. So we have to revisit the rent roll, tenant's parent tab, and rent roll sub tab, And we need to go to that market leasing drop-down menu and apply the retail profile. So we'll take a look at the report on page 82. I'll hit F3 to open my reports. And I'm navigating to the Tenant Reports Parent tab, Tenant Cash Flow sub-tab. I'm updating the Include drop-down menu for Buttercup Bakery. And I want to view this report on an annual basis. So last time I took you into the report options to change the print interval. This time, we're going to use these numbers that we see at the top of the report. So this is a little shortcut in version 11.5. 12 is your monthly report, 4 quarterly, 2 semi-annually, and 1, which we'll select now, is the annual view of your report. So I see income in year 1, the tenant is rolling in year 2, but really my focus in this case is down underneath other tenant income. I now have a line for percentage rent, and that starts at $5,000 in year 1. It continues into the rollover period, so into that market term, just like we set up continuing prior.
I'm sorry, can you tell me what is the button after the 1? What is that?
That is your global setting,
Oh, okay.
and my global setting is annually.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sorry, we go to global setting, right? Yeah.
She chose one.
Yeah, I got it.
So the last thing we will talk about before we break is on page 83 and 84. And we're going to take Buttercup. Now, right now, we've said upon expiration they roll to market and they pick up the retail terms. But on page 83, we say instead, actually, they have an option to renew. So we're going to go back into the rent roll and update their upon expiration. F4 for inputs. And instead of upon expiration rolling to market, they have an option. When you choose option, it ignores the market leasing profile, and you can see it has immediately inserted a second line into the rent roll, Buttercup Bakery option 1. Notice that everything, as you scroll back to the left-hand side of the window, is a direct copy and paste, so nothing has changed. The only thing you will notice is that this option lease will begin as soon as the prior lease ends. Literally, the next day. But we have a couple of things to change in the option lease. Instead of paying $14 per square foot, in this case, in the option lease, they'll be paying 100% of market. So we're going to the rental income band, and instead of dollar per square foot per year, this will be percent of market at 100%. The only other thing that will change is their sales volume. They're doing really well in our building. So their sales volume has gone up to $1 million every year. So we're moving into our percentage rent section and changing the sales amount from $750,000 to $1 million. Now on page 84, we can go see how that has changed our reports. F3, right back into that reporting screen. And I haven't changed any of my settings on the reports, so everything looks the same except it doesn't. Year 1, I'm still getting the same values. Now year 2 and beyond, I don't see anything for the original lease because it is ignoring the market leasing profile. If I want to see what else is happening with this tenant area, I have to go up to the Include drop-down menu, and now I have Buttercup Bakery option 1 to view for. So I select option 1, which begins in June of 2019, and continues through the end of my analysis. So any questions about that? Option leases, percentage rent? Feeling fab? Good, okay. It's a great time for a break. It's 8:36, let's meet back at 8:50. So I'll see you guys in 14 minutes.